Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I will be your host for today's show. We are once again on our California trek, and we are here outside of Sacramento, and we are at the Women's Corporate Directors event, which is sponsored by Diligent and Equilar and is hosted by the Wilderader Wineries and the Grand Reserve Inn, which is just a beautiful location. And today we're going to talk about how boards can evaluate their governance, risk, and compliance programs. And joining me is somebody that I'm happy to say has a lot of experience in that space. But welcome Shellye Archambeau, who's a board member with Verizon Communications, Okta Inc., Roper Technologies, and the familiar retail brand Nordstrom's. So welcome, Shellye.
Pleased to be here.
So before we get into the governance and risk and compliance, here we are in this amazing setting, okay? But you can always go to nice settings. The value of this is the network and the interaction, but share why it's valuable for you as an experienced director to still come to an event like the Women Corporate Directors.
I take time each year to actually participate in a couple of corporate director events. And I do that because as a board member, it's important to focus not just on the company and the industries that they represent and understand what's happening there, but also to understand what's happening in other boardrooms. And by attending a meeting like this, you get a chance to actually interact with other corporate directors, understand what the challenges are, where pressure is, see if there's some new trends or issues that are emerging, et cetera. And frankly, share some lessons learned, other things to focus on, et cetera. And it's a great place to network as well. We're always looking for good board members at every board.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing to either have the things that you're doing validated or take home a new idea. So I understand the value of any kind of interaction with other directors. So while we were preparing for this, I told you this was special for me because I actually have a director that has participated in many of the things that I've been involved with over the years. So you've worked in the space and actually consulting with people on governance and risk and compliance. So my challenge to you today is I'd like you to think about sort of the three things in each of those disciplines that sort of will help boards sort of get their arms around that. And I thought maybe the first place to start would be governance. So if you could look at the three steps or the three keys of that, and then we'll move on to risk and compliance.
Sure, but first, if you don't mind, let me define governance.
Okay.
Because when people talk about corporate governance, it's this very broad term, and what exactly does that mean? So for a company, when you think about their governance, they're really talking about what the processes, what the different policies, what the structures are that they use to actually operate the business so they can achieve their long-term objectives, whatever they happen to be. So simply said, that's really what it is. So when you're trying to understand how does a company actually operate and what are their governance processes, et cetera, you need to actually step back to look at, well, what are they? What are the processes that are used by which they manage and operate the overall organization? And you can easily get that kind of information from companies by looking at what do the agendas look like, right? Where do they spend time and focus? Who participates in the meetings, et cetera, that they're doing? Because once you've done that, then you get a sense and a handle on how do companies think about the importance of actually operating their business. Who participates? Who are the leaders, right, of different elements? All of that comes into play when you're really trying to understand what are the processes and policies and structures, right, that a company is using to execute.
So I spend a lot of time on this show talking about the importance of board leadership. I assume that that's something that resonates with you when you're thinking of the word governance.
Absolutely right. The roles that are played by obviously the CEO and the chair and or lead director are critical because they set the tone. They set the tone for how things function and operate. So having the right leadership in place is critical. But what's also critical is making sure that you understand what those different roles and responsibilities are and where delegation exists. So what delegation does the CEO have in authority versus what the board has? Understanding the committees, what their overall sets of charters are, what's included, what's not included. All of that will help you understand kind of the overall governance structure that actually exists at the company.
Okay, Shellye, so let's move on to risk. Now, risk, I always get a charge of because I think people think that it just came up a couple years ago, okay? Risk has been a part of the strategy process from the very beginning that businesses started, okay? You have to take some risks to get some reward.
Absolutely.
It's always been part of things, but boy, has it surfaced as an important four-letter word today. So help directors sort of get the perspective of risk.
When you think about risk, people, as you said, think about it as a four-letter word. Risk is bad. You have to eliminate risk. Wrong. Risk is all about understanding your risk, defining what the risk appetite is, and for the company, determining how much risk you're willing to tolerate versus how little. Because that varies by company. It varies by industry. It varies by size of business. So every company has its own risk tolerance. So understanding what that is allows you then to understand what the risk profile is and what it should be for the overall business itself. And as you said, you want risk. The key is understanding what they are and how you mitigate, manage, and/or insure against, therefore eliminating, right, kind of the overall risk. And that is the role of the board of directors working with the CEO to really understand what those key risks are. So when you think about companies, when companies do a good job of risk management, they should have a very robust and rigorous process by which they go through to identify what are their key risks. And then what categories do they fall into? How likely or how impactful? And once you understand that, then what are their top risks? And then what do I do about them? Do I mitigate? Do I try to figure out how to insure? Do I actually exit certain businesses to reduce risk? And that conversation needs to happen at the senior management level, but also with the board, so that everybody is comfortable that decisions being made are actually within the right risk tolerance for that particular business.
I think boards are getting better, okay? And I like it when the risk is, again, starts down in the people that are doing the operating plans. I mean, that's where, other than the black swan kind of risk,
Exactly.
That's where the risk should start. They need to understand when I do my business and meet my budgets, what are the risks that I, have to be sensitive to.
I agree. I think in some of the best situations I see, audit committees, which usually have the charter to do the deep dive on risk management, they'll actually have business owners, business unit execs responsible for certain risks come through the audit committee at least once a year to review kind of their business, the risk levels, why, and how they're managing that overall risk, and then what direction that risk is going in. Because you're right, at the end of the day, the ownership resides with the business units, and it is the senior leadership and then the board who actually ensures that it's being handled properly.
Well, that would be a great practice for companies to do that. So the last one, and maybe it's good we saved it for last, is compliance. And I have to tell you that any survey that I look at, anything that relates to compliance is always very low on a board member's enjoy to-do list, okay? How can I get through the compliance stuff so that I can get to strategy or the other issues? Yet, when you look at those companies that have either had violations, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or whatever it might be that cost sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars, you just can't turn a blind eye to compliance. So give us the oversight keys for compliance.
Absolutely. And first I have to tell you that I'm definitely biased in this area. As the former CEO of MetricStream, who was in the risk compliance business and providing software and tools, one of the best ways for board members and therefore companies to handle compliance is honestly to try to bring as much rigor to it as possible, and bringing systems and tools can absolutely help. But for boards, they have to understand by industry, by size, there's different levels of compliance requirements, and having the right teams in place, the right tools in place to actually handle those can help a board member relax more. Because frankly, the biggest fear is that we're not doing something we're supposed to be doing. And if things are handled manually, it's really easy to make mistakes or have misses. But if we can actually provide systems and tools that give leadership and boards a clear understanding that we're actually doing all that we're supposed to be doing on the compliance side, it makes a huge amount of difference, because they're hit with compliance requirements both by the government, state, local, federal, by industries, because industries different have certain things that they must do, and if they operate globally, that just gets magnified. So it is a huge challenge, and one that you are right, most people don't want to spend a lot of time on because it's not necessarily a business driver. And therefore, you want to make sure you're getting done what needs to get done, but frankly, you want to spend your time on how can we actually grow the business, not how are we actually making sure that we're complying. So systems and tools help.
Well, all those uninterested directors will be very happy if the regulators come in or there's a lawsuit and in the minutes shows that they spent time on compliance of whatever issue it is. That's a big help.
Oh, it is, because at the end of the day, it's all about duty of care. And duty of care means that you are doing what you are supposed to be doing and what a reasonable person would expect to be doing in terms of leading a company to review and understand and impact, right? The different business elements that are going on, and compliance is a key element of that.
Well, Shellye, again, you came through. I expected a lot from you, and you certainly gave me a lot. You really covered those topics as good as any guest I've ever had. So I want to thank you for taking the time and joining me today.
All right, thank you very much for having me.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.